Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at three books, all by the artist Brian Blomerth. Brian, as you could probably tell immediately by the covers and titles of these books, is an artist who's very interested in the history of psychedelics, and these are a series of autobiographies about people who were important researchers in the realm of psychedelics. So a lot of just amazing imagery throughout these books. I don't want to get into like the details of the history that Brian Blomberth covers because obviously I think that's where you should go read the book. So I just want to give you a sense about what each book is and just talk about some of the visuals I really enjoyed in these. One of the really cool things in each one of the books is Blomberth has an introduction from a fairly important person in the history of psychedelics. So like in the introduction to this one, which is about the creation of LSD, you have an introduction from Terence McKenna's brother, Dennis McKenna. Each one of those introductory essays gives you a lot of the historical details, which is actually pretty useful in these books because the books themselves are so trippy and psychedelic. It gives you some of those facts up front so that when you encounter them in the book, you're almost like prepped for processing it in the stranger way that it's presented in the story. These are comics, but they're also a lot of like just full page spreads, 2 page spreads, but there are also pages that function like comics. They each have, I think, also some interesting spot color stuff going on. I think in this one that I'm looking at, these are the three spot colors for this book, or there's a yellow in there, but I don't think it's a typical four color job, CMYK job. I'm not sure, but there's some diffusion dither stuff and some really nice things like these gradients here that seem like there's more going on with the printing. Really cool visuals all throughout. You can see each one is this beautiful illustration on its own and a lot of symbolism. Like here we're getting this idea of the spectrum coming out, be going through the glass and breaking out. That has obvious references to like Pink Floyd as well. So I think there's some interesting things like that in there symbolically. One of the riskier features of these books, I think, I don't know what the legality on this is, but this is all pretty interesting to me, is that Blomberth is showing how to make these drugs. This seems a little bit dangerous to me in that you might have someone go and trying to do this at home and not do it so well and hurt themselves, but it's also in terms of just capturing the history of something. It's really interesting to see a visual representation of the science behind how it was made. And that's where I think like the comics, actual panel to panel comics, is used most interestingly in these books. This is a different type of information being conveyed from panel to panel, if you can call them that, than we usually get in comics. And so that's a very kind of cool, different approach. Really like this drawing here. It just cracked me up of these mice that he's testing the LSD on. This is something where he thought he wasn't getting any results, and then he's walking out the door, and you see that the mice are obviously tripping balls and potentially becoming linguistic, as the suggestion there. But love that little illustration. Continuing on with the idea of showing how to make the drugs in these, there's also a number of times where there are actual food recipes given, which I think is another fun feature of this. So this is an ingredient for Calermus, which looks like some kind of very large, tasty pancake treat. And yeah, I might have to try and make this at some point. Some really just visually interesting page layouts in these as well. Here you see the page layout kind of syncs up with the content where he's flipping through his own notebook, and so you got this notebook paper in the back. You got a lot of things like diagrams of the LSD molecule, but a lot of other interesting little things like music going on in here and the music being broken on the rainbow. There's all these extra sensory kind of things going on in the book that to me make a lot of sense with the content. And this is a very different way. It's almost like looking at a Kandinsky painting or something. These colors have musical meaning in here. There's a sense that if you spent a lot more time with this, there would be a lot more meaning to drag out of this. I can't say that I've spent that time or that it would actually play out that way, but there seems in each one of these to be some kind of little system that you could look into, which is really fascinating. And now we get to the story of the acid actually kicking in for this guy for the first time, and you get some really, really fascinating effects here to show the psychedelic experience. Again, I'm not sure. Some of it looks kind of like a spot color job, but this would obviously have to be a mix of colors, so I'm not sure. But it has a really nice, like, graphic, screen printed look on the page almost. The title of this one, Bicycle Day, comes from the fact that this researcher would take the LSD experimentally, and then the first time he did it, he was going home and didn't think anything had happened, and it kicked in while he was riding his bike. So this is a scene here where he's going home, like really having a full trip for the first time, and he's riding his bike. And again, the visuals on this are just so clever, referencing a lot of different styles throughout art history, to try and get across the psychedelic experience, and not just falling into the standard, like, super symmetrical type of geometrical patterns. There's a lot of innovative ways of showing different ideas in here. You'd think that over so many books worth of this type of stuff, you might run out of ideas, but that's definitely not the case. You can see here that there's just beautiful visuals all the way throughout. This page, again, is another one where we go back to the spot colors. I think that pink, the yellow, and the blue are the spot colors, and there's a lot of beautiful, like, mixing of the inks here and then pulling them out into their actual just straight color. So beautiful, beautiful, like, print making as comics. Some more of that really stunning color play. A lot of this isn't going to come across on the screen, but there are so many, like, details in taking this image and shifting it against itself and pulling out different pieces with different spot colors and letting them overlap. It's just really beautiful to look at the surface that is created here, as well as the imagery itself. And throughout all of this, you get some style play with materials as well. It's not all just this more, I don't want to say computer done style, but like clean line with flat colors in it. You get some of these beautiful watercolors. It looks like there's been some, like, this maybe had watercolor pencil in there. So there's a lot of material play going on in the background as well. Assuming a lot of this is put together digitally after the fact, but I'm not sure. That's my guess, is a lot of these elements are being created separately and brought together visually. And then this one, this was the first one I read. I tried to read them in order that they came out. I think that's the order I'm reviewing them in. But this one cracked me up. When you get to this back page here, there's a little dot and it says, "Lick this spot." Yeah, obviously, after reading a book about LSD, that is both tempting and scary little joke put in there. And I quite enjoyed that, and then was surprised to see that that carried on in the other books. I won't show what the joke is in the other books, but just say that carries on and that he keeps that as a theme, which I really like. And obviously these are all made to sit on the shelf together, and he's very intentionally working in the idea of a series with this, which is, I think, is quite cool. And I look forward to seeing if there are future ones. I'm not sure what the plans are, but there would be plenty to explore. This book, Lily Wave, you're looking at the researchers who are originally involved with ketamine, MDMA, ecstasy research. And you'll see that there is, even though Brian Blomberth's, like, main clean line style, filling it in, shows up as the predominant style in this book as well, there's still a lot more style play. So you get things like this beautiful airbrushed, spray painted looking effect here, bursting out behind this graphic of a brain. A lot of, like, stencil work looks like was done on here. Really cool. Then some really interesting, like, non sequitur imagery, where you can try and think your way through this in your own way. You can do this, like, chain of connections, and you could read those chain of connections in multiple ways. Like here, I could see that there's an A and then there's an A structure, but then I can also follow, like, the dot down to here at least. I don't know about to here. So something like this I like because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And when you're talking about psychedelics, you're talking about getting people into their own psyche and giving them something like this that has multiple ways of being interpreted and is open to the viewer. It is a sounding board for their own psyche. So I think pages like this are really important. And as someone who, like, loves comics because of panels and the rhythms and things, I like coming across these pages because the pages where it's like big, big spreads, big spreads, big spreads. It's a different way of approaching comics that's interesting. But to me, I always get excited by panels. I like panels. I like the rhythm of panels and things. So these are always cool. One of the wilder things in this book is that the researchers are taking drugs and going into an isolation tank to try and psychically communicate with dolphins, learn dolphin language. There's also a very uncomfortable scene in here, but something that's part of the actual story, where they give one of the dolphins ecstasy, I believe, and it's all horny, and this lady's having to jerk off a dolphin, which I find extremely uncomfortable. There's another area in here where there's some predictions that were made by these researchers regarding the future. We're talking about ARPANET here in 1976. They're talking about how computers will develop a single integrated planet-wide mind of their own, and then talking about AI taking over and maybe eventually put humanity in dome cities. So that's kind of interesting to see as well, what these people were talking about and thinking about besides just the psychedelic research, and how their research in psychedelics was influencing their views on the world. And obviously they were getting some of it right when they're talking about this huge network of computers developing across the world. We'll have to see if the rest of it comes true. But yeah, I don't feel like I need to show as much in these ones. There's pretty much a visual similarity across all of the books. Just want to give you a flavor for each one of them. And then the most recent one, the one that caught my eye because this is newly just out. By the way, I should shout out the publisher. The publisher is Anthology Editions in New York. And I think this is the newest one that came out. Maybe, oh no, sorry, the Lily Wave is the newest one that just came out. And that's the one that caught my attention. And then I realized there was 3 books and I got them all. So this one is about a couple, Gordon and Tina Wasson. Sorry I didn't give the names of the researchers in the other one, but I didn't make a note of that. This couple is interesting in that it's going very deeply into the history of how women can often get overlooked, especially if they're in a research couple like this. But Brian Blomerth is doing a really good job showing that Tina is the one that introduced Gordon to mushrooms. He thinks they're gross. She thinks they're beautiful. He associates them with rot and decay, and she associates them, with being the life of the forest. And they come from different cultural backgrounds, so they're bringing that to it. And she just introduces him, and then as a couple, they become obsessed with doing research into fungi, mushrooms, mycelium. You can see more of the material play. You can see Blomerth getting back out the watercolors. It looks like there's some crayons in there and things. So that shows up throughout all of the books, that material play. Really, really enjoy this page here where they're talking about the use of mushrooms throughout the Aztec and Mayan cultures. I read this like a couple days after I watched some documentary on Netflix that was talking about the Aztec Mayan calendar, and the Mayan system of counting, and the Mayan way of representing. Actually, they have some of it here. Their counting system that is a like two unit system. Basically, you have dots and then they have a bar, but it's a base 12 system. And that really caught my interest. And actually, I went and got some books, and there was a lot that came out of it that I'm not ready to talk about yet. Just ideas that would be off of what this video is about. But really liked seeing someone else like picking up on what excited me about what I was seeing in that video. The combination of both numbers and then pictographic things all combining into one language. Also, what they were talking about with the Mayan calendar, having like 3 different ways of representing time was really interesting to me. It was almost like a 3-dimensional way of thinking about time, where you have different counting systems cycling against each other in different ways. So I need to read a lot more about that, but really excited to see some of those ideas showing up. That's one of the big things, is just how I follow my interest through life. Is something catches my interest and then it shows up 3 or 4 times in the next couple weeks. Like, that's putting it at the top of my priority list. And so this book did that for me. It took something I was already interested in and scooched it up on my priority list. There's a beautiful little sequence here where they're doing a guided ceremony of psychedelics, and I really like the whole sequence. There's a lot of beautiful printmaking stuff going on in here, again, that's not going to show up on screen, but then you have this fun little conceit where the guy's coming down and pulling the paper down, so that's like the psychedelic break. And then you go back into that mixed media approach in the background. Again, a very different stylistic application of that mixed media approach that keeps it fresh. It's always like a new type of exciting when this pops up. It's not like, oh, there's the watercolor stuff again. And then here you can see another much more serene and calming use of the watercolors versus this more cluttered and almost like graffiti like application of the colors. So these books are just beautiful books all the way through. They are quite fascinating in terms of their accounts of historical figures. Obviously, you can see that the books themselves don't have a lot in terms of dialogue. It's more about the visuals, but that's where the essays up front give some context, like I said. So you get a pretty good dose of history, and then it gets fleshed out in this more interesting, visually playful way throughout the book. So I think this is a fascinating series of books. I would highly recommend it to anyone, whether you have an interest in psychedelics or not. I find psychedelics fascinating, but I'm too terrified to take them. I'll admit that. So this is interesting for me. It's like, come back and report what you've seen to the chicken, but even if you don't have an interest in psychedelics, I think this is just such a visually beautiful set of books that I would recommend it to pretty much anybody. But please don't use like the recipes in here to try and cook your own drugs. Whole new world. 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 For you and me.